Welcome to Your Need to Know. I'm your host, Catherine Reed, and today I'm going to be introducing you to the new student representative to the Fairfax County School Board, Kimberly Boateng. Thank you so much for being here, Kimberly.
Thanks for having me.
So I was very excited when I got news of the fact that a new student representative had been elected. I do frequent the school board meetings and have over the years seen some very amazing young people sit in that chair. But your background is quite impressive. It is quite interesting. And I'd like, for you to share a little bit about your background with our viewers so they can get to know you. First of all, you've been to 7 different schools. Tell me a little bit about your life here in the county and how you have experienced public education here in Fairfax County.
Okay, so I have been to 7 different schools, 6 of which have been in Fairfax County. I went to Crestwood Elementary School, which is in Springfield, Virginia. And then I moved to Springfield Estates Elementary School for the Advanced Academic Program. But before that, I was at Humans Elementary in Fredericksburg. And then in middle school, I was at Twain Middle School for AAP program. And then we moved to South County. So I was at South County Middle School, and then for high school, I was at South County High, and I'm currently at Robert E. Lee High School. And being from like many different schools, I feel like for some people, they may see of it as like, oh, that's kind of like troubling. Like, can you like manage moving so often, like going to different schools? Like I remember saying, I was joking around. I said, in like the past 4 years, I've been a nudist student 4 times, and it's interesting. But I also consider it kind of like a gift because I feel as if certain people, like say they're in a certain like school for the longest time, they believe this is what the county is. But say someone at a completely different school within the same county they believe this is what the county is like. I feel as if me going to different schools is like giving me the chance to see what the county like really encapsulates and what like the differences between like these schools and what's like kind of county-wide. So I think that was like it was really enlightening to see all the different things that the county has to offer and different things. Like there are some issues that I feel like school issues and some issues that I've seen like this is universal.
Right, so many of the things that you've pinpointed are areas of interest to you are also in alignment with One Fairfax, which is the county's commitment to racial and economic diversity, equity issues in the county. And as you said, you've been in schools where there's just diversity of ethnicity, but also diversity of economics. And so you've really experienced firsthand what students are experiencing within our school system. Mm-hmm. Talk a little bit about some of the things you have highlighted that are of particular interest to you.
So the things that I have highlighted that are of interest to me are stuff that, like, so for example, I'm interested in talking about implicit bias awareness. And for those who aren't aware of implicit bias is kind of like whatever biases you may have towards or against certain racial groups that is subconscious. It's not something that is you are explicitly biased against a certain group. It's all like within them, and sometimes it's based on like media or societal norms, and it's something that usually many people aren't aware that they have, and it's something that I feel as if majority of people have and aren't aware. So the reason why I want to bring that to attention is I feel as if even though like implicit bias is something that almost everyone is like has within them, being aware of it is something that we can do to kind of like combat it, especially in the education system. Because what happens sometimes is that like without knowing, teachers or staff members may see like a certain group in a certain light, unbeknownst to themselves. So that kind of ties into like the punishment reform thing, because I feel as if it ties into that thing. And what I want to talk about with punishment reform, and I think that's something that I was like during the election process, I was really talking about the most. And what I want to focus most on is suspension and expulsion. And I said, personally, I believe that a school is meant to build up a child to be the best citizen that they can be in society. And I feel as if using suspension and expulsion as a first hitch option is, in my eyes, like giving up on the child. And I feel as if the worst thing a school could do to a child is give up on them. Because what ends up happening is if someone gives up on you, they end up giving up on themselves, and then they're not the good citizen that we want to build them up to be. So like what I was like thinking about like bringing forward is things I saw back in middle school. They started this little pilot program that was back at Twain, where instead of like having like, oh, you have an option of being suspended for this, or we could do this type of program where you and this other person, say if it was like a confrontational thing that ended up being like bubbling over. Then they have a conversation, they talk about, they kind of pinpoint what the issue is, why you do it. If it's like a repeat offense, why is this person keep doing what they're doing? And it's kind of like, I see that there's an issue here with this student and I want to deal with it. And I felt that was very promising. And you know, I wish I was able to like look in on those more, but since I was in middle school, I can never really see what was going on in there. But I think it's something that we should really like take a look into, see what we can do. And also there's been studies that say like expulsion and suspension aren't helping students. Like say this, like kids I know who have been suspended, they're like, well, I'm at home. And they're gonna come back to school, do the same thing. It's not helping anybody.
It hasn't solved the reason that they were expelled
Exactly.
in the first place. And there's plenty of research that shows that students of color and students with disabilities are disproportionately expelled and suspended, more so than other students. I mean, the data is all there showing that we have a problem, and that comes back to implicit bias too.
Definitely.
How teachers interact with students. And in a very diverse county, we don't have teachers at the front of the classroom that reflect the population sitting in those seats. So they bring their biases with them and how they are dealing with those students. But you know, it sounds like you really have thought about this. Even as a young person, you gave a lot of thought to why this has been happening.
So with like implicit bias and punishment reform and all those things, like talking about like at-risk students, I feel as if sometimes it's a very slippery topic. That's many times it's because people don't want to believe that they may have certain biases within themselves. So often when I try to like introduce the topic, I talk about myself and say like, hey, I like, even me myself being a person of color, a woman of color, like at that, I like do things that sometimes I sit back and I'm like, did you do that because there was a reason, or are you a little bit biased about something? And by me bringing that up, I kind of hope to like spark like people like, okay, since she's admitting that this has happened, like this is how she felt at a certain point, maybe I can look within myself and find that maybe I had acted in a certain way that is like not really matching like with the situation, but more about whatever biases I may have had. So by doing that, I'm trying to like, I don't want to approach things, so I feel as if what the worst thing that could happen is when you bring something up and people get offended by it, because what happens is when people get offended by it, they're less likely to work with you.
It's true.
Yeah, they draw within themselves.
They take it personally. And what a lot of people are not understanding is that institutions, for instance, institutional racism is not about one person being racist. It's about all of us supporting certain systems and processes that keep that in place.
Definitely.
And a great example of implicit bias, you know, I grew up in Southwest Virginia. I don't really have an accent anymore, but my friends did. And one of my friends went to San Francisco, and he said having a Southern accent made people believe two things about me: that I'm very honest and I'm not too smart.
There we
And
go.
that's just an example of this implicit bias about people with deep Southern accents. They're not too bright, but they're very honest. Okay? So if people can wrap their minds around the fact that we all have things that we think about the way the world works and who we think people are, just by cues, that we have to dismantle that, especially when we have so many different kinds of students sitting in our classrooms. So I love the fact that you're going to be the voice for the student population. And do you expect that you will be hearing from students in this role so that you can take these things to the school board?
I sure hope so, because I always talk about like what good is a leader that doesn't have a group to lead. And I'm a representative at this point, and I believe the best way for me to be a representative is to hear from the kids in which I'm representing. Without them, what good of a representative am I? Like, of course, I have my own personal issues, and also this is something that was brought up during the elections. They asked us the question, like, there'll be many students in this county in which you do not belong into communities and groups that, like, they are matched into. How will you be able to represent them? And I said, like, that the best thing I could do is listen, because there will be like the student who has experiences I've never experienced. There will be the Latino student that I've never like experienced issues with. There's the male student that I don't know the experiences that they've faced. So with that, I really hope that students really do come to me. I see that they're the people who keep me going. Like every now and then I'll get like a little email and someone's like, hey, I saw this. I don't really know you, but like I saw this and I wanted to like jump in and do this. I'm like, I love those. Because it makes me feel like, yeah, these people are really like, to have someone like the people pushing you like, hey, this is something that's really important and I really want you to get like, I see what you're doing and I appreciate it and I like, here's some ideas that I have. It's very important to me, and I really feel as if those type of things are what the whole student rep like position is made for.
So will they give you your own email box? I'm wondering about this. Like, will they say like the Fairfax County.gov whatever, and it'll be like your mailbox where all these things come?
Yep.
Really?
I get my own fcps.edu email, which as of right now, I don't have, but as soon as I do.
July 1, because you're official July 1.
July 1st. And as soon as I get those, what's helpful about that is that not only will people with personal emails be able to reach me, people who don't have personal emails and only have their fcpsschools.net email will also be able to reach me. So there won't be like, because right now when people are reaching out to me and they want to like access a document that I have with like my own personal email is difficult because of the access things.
Right.
So with having that email, it'll be a lot more easy to like, all right, both personal and school emails can reach out to me, and I feel that that's a better reach for me.
So you are a very busy person. You are in marching band, you are in jazz band, you are taking IB classes and advanced placement classes. You are doing so much. If you're going to be inundated with emails, will you need an assistant? Because I don't even know how you do what you do now.
So I think so. I'm like talk with the current student rep, Benjamin Tignor, and he tells me like, yeah, you have this person who like makes, like he said like it's an administrative assistant who makes like your planning stuff. I like love my calendar. If it wasn't for my calendar, I don't know what I would do without it. And so, but currently I just do whatever I do, and I use like, I'm a very like a to-do list type person, to-do list and calendars, because I have like not the best memory. So like I'll have like, say if I need to have this small little task, if I don't write it down, I will not do it. So it's like, okay, like it's the very bare minimum task, like make sure you grab like this coffee on the way out or else I will forget it.
Well, you are smart. You came to this a lot earlier in life than I did. I used to carry things around in my head, and then I got to a certain age where I can't carry things around in my head. So I have learned later in life that you have to write every single thing down. I live by the calendar as well. So I'm sure you've heard too about the legendary school board meetings that sometimes go on and on and on and on. And I'm sure you've gotten the job description. So when we come back from our break, we are going to be talking with Kimberly Boateng about her new role as the student representative to the Fairfax County School Board.
Mom, I got it. What are you doing in there?
I got stuck.
Are you a dog?
I wouldn't do that. Have you seen the pliers? Where'd you find those?
It's not your birthday.
Sorry.
Bye, Grandpa.
Bye, Grandpa.
Take care of yourself.
What are you doing? What are you looking for?
Julie was always a voracious reader. She carried 2 novels on an airplane because she'd read one on a 3-4 hour ride. And at some point, I began to notice that she would read a page and couldn't remember what she had just read, and she'd have to go back and read it again.
I don't remember much these days after I read, but less does for me, and I love it.
Sharing. Pass it on. A message from the Foundation for a Better Life.
Welcome back to Your Need to Know. I'm your host, Catherine Reed, and today I'm talking with the new student representative to the Fairfax County School Board, Kimberly Boateng. Thank you so much for being here, Kimberly.
Thank you for having me.
So some of the things that the school board has tackled in the past, and I want to specifically talk about dress code, because Ryan McElveen, who has recently rolled off the school board, was an advocate for reforming the dress code and non-genderizing the dress code. Tell me a little bit about the background and what you've heard from students, both about the issue and how that issue has been resolved or is in the process of being resolved.
So what's often happened like throughout my years of like schooling is the dress code. Like it was often an issue with like I never had like my guy friends complain to me about the dress code, but for my female friends it's always been like, man, it's real. Like say it's like it's always an issue during the summer. Like it's really hot. I like and then another teacher would come in. He's like, you can't wear this. You can't. And I think in the FCPS SR&R book, it talks about how if there is a dress code like violation an issue, that it should be managed in a way that preserves the students and like it preserves the students' dignity.
Right.
And what often happens is that it seems as if that part of the dress code gets ignored. Because what ends up happening, like say if like there's a girl who's wearing a shirt, let's say a little too short for like the likes of the staff members, it like what ends up happening is that student gets called out in front of like their friends or their peers, and it ends up like ruining the rest of their day. Or sometimes the student that student has to go home because of like that's like a dress code violation. So there's like often the times about the dress code being genderized, it's also like it's been an issue. Like my friends are always like, why is it that what I wear like is more important than the education I'm like receiving? And that's really honestly like disheartening. That often like sometimes we feel that there's certain like issues that are being like swept under the carpet because someone's wearing spaghetti straps.
I know, and that's, to me, that's like losing the plot. The other thing is it's too subjective. What's acceptable one day, one time, in one classroom is suddenly it's against the policy and it's unacceptable in another one. And it does tend to focus on what girls wear, not what boys are wearing, but what girls wear. And so trying to make sort of a standard policy that says what is or is not acceptable in the classroom, to me, is a very worthy goal. Because I think, and again, there's too much focus on boys being distracted by what girls wear, and that's kind of ridiculous to me. I don't know how you feel about it, but I'm like, I don't understand, you just need to like check your own self.
Yes, of course. Like we always talk about like especially the off-the-shoulder tops, which have been like a big issue, like when girls wear like off-the-shoulder tops, and I've like brought it up to teachers like, why is it that that's an issue? And they're like, oh yeah, it's distracting. We always have this running joke of like, I didn't realize that shoulders were so distracting.
Yeah, right?
Exactly. So we're always like, and the idea that it's being distracting to boys kind of like entails the idea that the boys' education is more important than the girls, because say if the like, oh yeah, this girl's wearing this and like the boys are getting distracted, so you have to go home. And it's like, oh, so because I'm wearing this certain thing, I can't be here, instead of thinking like, hey, maybe we should teach like this set of like people, like if they're getting distracted, maybe certain values.
Right, like check yourself.
Yeah, like certain values, like you're like, this is distracting you, you should maybe value like the fact that maybe your education's more important than a girl's shoulders.
I know.
And it's like, that's what the main issue is. And like, I guess like some teachers that have like rebutted it have been like, well, we're in a professional like environment and we're teaching you for, I'm like, but it's the school, it's not a law firm, is what I always like. It's not a law firm. And of course there should be like certain things to keep order. But I feel as if and too often it's like extreme, and that many people don't feel comfortable wearing like certain things. I remember like in my like personal experience when I was wearing a t-shirt and I had a teacher be like, this one is a lot better than the ones that you used to wear. And I was like, that was like kind of demeaning.
Right, like
it was
like,
rather demeaning.
Why would teachers be evaluating anybody's choice of clothing?
And it's like, and I feel as if it kind of like dismantles a certain relationship. It, like, say if someone gets dress coded by this certain teacher, like forever in their mind they're thinking that's that one teacher that kind of like humiliated me in front of like the person. Like, oh well, if you didn't want to be humiliated, you shouldn't have worn this. It's a very slippery slope, and I feel as if with like certain amends to like dress codes, if like a lot of these problems can be fixed.
I think so too, but I think it's going to evolve over a period of time. Let's talk a little bit about drug use and something that I have heard a lot about, which is vaping. I had no idea that that has really become a huge problem.
It's a huge problem, and like it's crazy because like say like a year or two ago you would have never thought like it would be as big as a problem that it is now. And I think what happens with it is that many kids are unaware that it's a problem, and even if they do know it's a problem, they don't think it's as big as a problem as it is. Like say like you go like someone's smoking cigarettes, everyone's like cigarettes, that's disgusting, but no one will face like many people won't feel the same like disgust as they would like face with cigarettes, and they're like, oh, it's okay, it's coconut.
Yeah, and what about that? Flavored things that are addictive, and then the Juul company, which is really just a cigarette company, basically saying those were not intended for children.
They're definitely intended for children.
Definitely intended for children.
Absolutely.
So what do you see the way forward is as far as school policy?
School policy, like the way students would think is like, oh, since it looks like a USB port. So what ends up happening is often when someone's like, oh yeah, it's a USB, it looks like a USB port, so teachers, I won't get caught with it. And I feel as if it needs to be advertised more like, hey, this is something that is wrong, this is something that's like not good, and it's something that is addictive, and and it's something that does affect the adolescent mind. And I feel as if many people aren't aware of that. I actually did a school project on it because I do have many peers who like use vaping products, which is kind of like, it's disappointing, but it's mainly because of the lack of knowledge. And I think people like the way with our health curriculum, it's like they are like pushing more like, hey, vaping is considered substance abuse and stuff like this. It has nicotine in it, and many people don't know that vaping products have nicotine. They don't know that they can get a nicotine addiction based on it, and they also don't know that it's also considered a gateway drug to more heavier and more harmful drugs. And I feel as if like with that information, people should know about it. And also going into like, say if you catch a student with this, and like of course like punishments and stuff like that, but you also have to talk to them like, do you know the risks of this? Do you know how harmful this could be for you and your brain and like your body respiratory system? Many kids don't know this.
Do you see that the family life education curriculum, which has always been a hot button issue, speaking of school board meetings, those are generally the best attended meetings, that and changing the name of Confederate high schools, but that's a whole nother subject. We don't have enough time to really get into everything you could be facing in your upcoming year. But let's talk about the family life education curriculum, because things like consent, that was a piece of legislation that was passed in the state legislature about adding consent to FLE, but there's a lot of things, including vaping, and, and educating students about these things, but it seems like it's a constant battle to add these things to the FLE curriculum.
So I just finished my last health curriculum for like the rest of high school, and what I know is like they had before like this year I've never seen anything taught about consent, and this year was the first time I've ever seen it like put into the curriculum. So that was good. Like they told you like rape without consent, like sex without consent is rape. Right. So that was the first time I had ever seen that. So I think those type of things are valuable, because I feel many times people don't know like we never like no one's ever taught that, so it's always become like in headlines. It's like no one was ever taught this. I'm like, but it still makes it wrong and stuff like that. So adding specific things into education that it's not exactly to say like academic is important. It's crucial for a student, especially growing up, where we're very impressionable. We don't know everything. That's what the part of growing up. To teach it to us is imperative to like make a student the best student that they can be. And I think it's very important that we add certain things like vaping, consent, all that stuff into the curriculum, because otherwise many students don't know certain risks that they're getting into, because teenagers are like more likely to get into risk. That's why our insurance is so like high for cars. And to like take that into account, teach them instead of like, oh, this is a controversial issue. well, it's controversial, but it'll be even more controversial if this student does something that they didn't know any better.
So I'm going to ask a question that you may not know the answer to. Students in trailers, is the biggest pushback coming from the students themselves or from the parents?
Students in like elementary school trailers?
Well, yeah, all the trailers, because they talk about the number of, we've got more students in trailers than the entire population of Richmond's school system. But I don't know if that's really coming from the students or whether that is really coming from the parents. And that might not be something that you've encountered.
I don't think, yeah, you see, when I was at Springfield Estates, they were doing construction, but like for my fourth grade class all year was in a trailer. And I didn't think too much about it. My little sister, her elementary school, she was in a trailer for at least 1 year. And I don't think students themselves, I think it's because we don't really think about it too much.
Kids are pretty adaptable.
Yeah, so like put us in a trailer, it's a classroom to us. But I guess from my assumption would be it's from parents, because I've never, like me coming from like a classroom like that's been in a trailer, I've never quite heard of that before.
It's something I hear about because, like, I run in that world. And the only other thing we're running out of time, but school boundaries. I think school boundaries and the renaming of certain high schools could end up being very big during your tenure.
It's already kind of big, considering I go to Robert E. Lee High School.
Yeah, I noted that.
Yeah, so that's already something that I'm already hearing things about. Like, how does the students feel about like renaming your high school? Is this something that would y'all be into? And it's something that I'm already facing, and it's something that we all have to think, we're all starting to think about. So that's really interesting.
Well, it is. I mean, I was there during the meetings when they changed it to Justice High School, Stewart to Justice High School. And, you hear all sides of it, and yet, we need to adapt to the times that we're living in.
Definitely.
So I know you're going to be you're a rising junior, is that correct?
That is correct.
You are a rising junior. You've got a lot on your plate, being in the IB program and your AP classes and all the extracurricular things you do. But I do want to wish you the best as you go off to Princeton in July for a 3-week program. You've had some wonderful opportunities, and I think being a student representative is going to be fabulous for the county.
It's going to be.
But I think it's going to be awesome for you too.
It's so awesome.
It's going to be so awesome for you too. You've done so many different kinds of things in your very young life, and I'm just delighted that the Dean of Students actually took the time to reach out and say, you ought to apply for this.
Yeah, it was really amazing because the Dean of Students and the administrative principal reached out to me we thought you'd be a wonderful candidate for it. And I was like, I had never heard of it before actually. So I was like, oh, let me go check this out. I did a little research. I was like, I'm gonna apply. And then I ended up at the election that day.
Well, I hope it's something you don't regret at all. Thank you very much, Kimberly, for being here. And you at home, this is what you need to know.